So, yes, I'm going to be talking about government-enforced anti-white racism with respect to this rather dismal story about Austin Metcalf, who was an American schoolboy, 17 years old.
He was the one who was murdered recently, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, very promising young man. Looks like he was pretty much a model citizen.
Let me just head it off straight away. Tim Pool told me it was self-defense by the guy who killed him. Is that true?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would be the last person to doubt Tim Pool's logic. When it comes to self-defense, he got Kyle Rittenhouse very right, didn't he? He famously said that Kyle Rittenhouse was a murderer, I believe.
Did he?
He did. Yeah,
I didn't know that. Actually.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he came down very hard on the side of the three Antifa mutants who tried to murder Kyle Rittenhouse and failed. They tried to touch him. They died doing what they did best, trying to touch a minor. I think that was a joke Tucker Carlson made, actually, which was good. Yep. But yeah, no, so we got this chap, Austin Metcalf, 17 years old, at a track meet, is stabbed in the heart by another schoolboy, Carmelo Anthony. He was black. Austin Metcalf was white. Carmelo Anthony had brought a knife with him to the track meet, as you do. I remember my days at school when we used to do athletics and we'd go to Exeter, to the local. I would always bring a knife with me, and just in case somebody touched my backpack.
Makes sense.
Which is basically
it's your right to self-defense, right?
It is. It's property rights are fundamental for Anglos.
Yeah, because England cares so much about them these days.
Yep, even dark Britons like myself. Then we cleave very, very jealously to our property, and so. But yes, I mean, details have been emerging about this pretty dismal case, but it definitely looks like it wasn't a case of self-defense. Like this young black man was, young black boy, 17-year-old boy was urging this Austin Metcalf on to something and then stabbed him in the heart. He died in his brother's arms, tragically. And then what did we see? Within hours of this young man's death, his father comes out and says, I forgive the killer. We shouldn't be hard on this young man. You know, he's made a mistake. His life shouldn't be ruined, basically.
So which government agency prepped him to give that speech?
Well, quite. So this is the young man. This is Carmelo Anthony. He posted, I believe, one or both of those pictures just hours before he stabbed Austin Metcalf to death. I think it was the one with the AK that he posted. So I mean, I think he has form. He'd been suspended from school actually for bringing in a knife before, so you know he had form. But anyway, there's a big, you got people like Tim Pool coming down on his side. There's a big Give, Send, Go campaign, GoFundMe campaign that's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, the comments actually by the donors are very, very enlightening. As to,
So they're trying to do a defense fund for him for a Rittenhouse style case.
Yes, they are, and he's got kind of knee-jerk tribal support, I think, from the black community in the US, of course.
The story that I'd seen in favor of his self-defense was essentially he was sat on a bench. Austin Metcalf and his brother began harassing him, trying to get him to shift off of the bench. So in a case of self-defense, he decided to stab him, which is what I do.
Hardly proportional.
Well, what they're actually trying to do is they're trying to make it like a modern-day Rosa Parks. And I mean, I remember Rosa Parks famously posing with...
which was also a staged event by the NAACP.
It was, and it looks like, actually, I mean, there was a tweet this morning, actually, I didn't put it in the show notes, but there was a tweet where someone was saying, the people who are now representing this chap, Carmelo Anthony, are actually known, like, race grifter types, and it looks like they're gearing up for a kind of George Floyd kind of sanctification.
This is going to be an OJ trial, isn't it?
That kind of thing. But the real focus here for me is, of course, this apology. So this is Austin Metcalf's father, Lee Metcalf, and this is what he had to say.
It's very fortunate that this other child decided to make a bad choice that's going to affect him for the rest of his life. I have compassion for every human being. This is not, I want to make this very clear. This is not a race issue. This is not a black and white issue. I don't want someone stepping up on a soapbox trying to politicize this. I don't appreciate some of the remarks I've seen online that people say there was this fight and they don't know. They weren't there.
Neither was he. He wasn't there.
So is he trying to defend the honor of his son's killer?
Yeah.
And defend his feelings as well? Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how you... When was this interview done? How soon was it done after his son was murdered?
Within hours.
Within hours.
Same day.
How was he even composed enough to be able to conduct an interview like this?
You tell me. And what's interesting, actually, if we look at the next link, is that his wife and the son who actually cradled his brother in his arms...
But he was a twin, wasn't he?
Twin, 17. They have a very different take on whether the killer should be offered compassion.
I heard your husband say within hours of this that he forgave this other young man, and he got there so quickly. And I honestly don't know that I could. And I just want to see, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong place to be, especially as quickly as this has happened. Megan, how do you feel on that front today?
I am not like their dad. I am so angry at that boy. And it's just not fair. That's all I have.
I understand.
I'd like to say it's forgave, not forgotten, but I'm not at that point yet to forgive that kid for what he did to my brother. Because, 17 years, my best friend, just there in the blink of an eye, I lost him. So I'm not at that point.
Yeah. It's crazy. So, as you can see, look, the brother has a cross around his neck. So they're obviously, I would say, that we can infer that they're Christian. But what is it that actually makes a father forgive his son's killer like this and display more concern for the killer than his own son? So, I wrote a piece for InfoWars last weekend where I was talking, about the case. And, I said, look, Jeff Metcalf, the father, could just be a deeply committed Christian. He could be someone who genuinely believes in the value of forgiveness and rejects the law of an eye for an eye. Or alternatively, he could just be a libtard whose brain has been so fried by the programming that all he really cares about is signaling his virtue. He's more interested in going on the news and saying, I'm a good person.
Basically. If it's that second one, that's sympathy for what happened to his son. I can't imagine what he's going through, but that's a deeply inhuman reaction to something.
Well, I wonder how much of this is him trying to exercise some sort of agency over the situation. Right, because there's nothing that he can do otherwise, and it's quite harrowing.
Grief does terrible things to people, and I think unless you've actually experienced real grief yourself, unless you've had a child murdered, and then you've got cameras pointed in your face, you don't honestly know how you would react. And I've been to funerals and I've seen mothers whose children have died young, and they're not even crying. It's not open and shut, but nevertheless there's this phenomenon that we see again and again of white parents whose children are murdered or seriously injured by non-whites in violent crime, and what's their first instinct? They go on the television and say, I've forgiven the attacker, the killer. It's not about race. It's categorically not about race.
It always feels like a talking point that has been handed to them.
Yeah, it sounds like a script. And so who might be providing this script? Well, there's an agency within the Department of Justice called the Community Relations Service. Would you be able to... Yeah, that's it. Nice. The Community Relations Service. And I think it's a very secretive organization, first of all. That's because of what it does and because of, the potential, really the explosiveness, actually, I think, of what it does. So the Community Relations Service was founded off the back of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So it was dreamed up basically by JFK, but it wasn't implemented, by JFK because he was killed. It was his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who oversaw its creation. And it was basically founded to pour oil on troubled waters. And, the waters were very troubled in the 1960s, right? And it was about trying to bring together the black and white communities to avoid racial violence, etc. so the website says, and this is the website that we've got up, the mission of the office is to be America's peacemaker, tasked with preventing and resolving racial and ethnic tensions, conflicts, and civil disorders, and in restoring racial stability and harmony.
This is the point, right? And this is why they get the parents to come out and say, this wasn't about race, I've forgiven my son's killer, because there is a collective debt being incurred when these happen. And it's very difficult for the individualist liberal mind to conceive of this, but there's a deep sort of human understanding. And so the father is, when they come out and say these things, they are in some way being responsible. They're in some way saying, well, look, I don't want the collective on one side to have an increased level of hatred for the collective on the other. And I want to maintain the harmony of society because these people have to live with us. And we don't want to arrive in a kind of 1930s Germany situation. And so I can understand why they're doing it. But as you said, it's kind of inhuman because it's entirely natural to have this, when this happens, to have a kind of sense of, no, there's a burden that you keep incurring and I am unable to get restitution. And it constantly happens, and there's no restitution for this burden that's being incurred.
Listen, I see things in a quite Carlylean perspective, personally, in that justice is good's revenge against evil.
Yes.
And if you deny that justice, well, then you're allowing evil to win.
Yes. But what's interesting, of course, is that it's not... On the one hand, I could understand a very committed Christian saying, look, I abjure the possibility of vengeance. I don't want that. But it's the then going on to say there's obviously no racial motive.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say so, I mean, what you're actually doing is you are foreclosing the possibility of any investigation of there ever actually being a racial motive.
And what was the history between these two kids?
Well, exactly. We don't know yet. But I mean, there doesn't even need to have to be a history. I mean, you can decide to murder someone for racist reasons just from looking at them because you see the color of their skin.
And we know the rates of interracial violence are incredibly lopsided.
Yes, yeah, incredibly skewed. So the CRS has been around since the 1960s. Its remit was broadened in the 1990s to include hate crimes against, sex-based discrimination, gender-based discrimination, all that kind of stuff, as well as racial incidents. We don't know a great deal about when it's used, but we're told that it was used during or in the aftermath of the Rodney King riots, when the police who had beaten Rodney King were on trial, and I think the CRS kind of jumped into action and was used to kind of keep tensions down. It was used in 2020 during the summer of Floyd as well. It was present in Minneapolis when Chauvin was on trial. But yeah, the actual workings of the organisation are kind of opaque. But occasionally you actually get a view into what they really do, like in detail. So, I mean, I started writing about the CRS at the end of 2023. And at that point, they had a case study on their website of the killing of a man called Donald Giusti in a park in Maine. And that really lets you see actually what they do. What does it actually mean for the CRS to intervene in a situation where a white person has been killed by a non-white person? So Donald Giusti was beaten over the head with a rock and kicked to death by a group of Somalis in a park in Lewiston, Maine. And there had been very serious tensions within the community for some time because there'd been, it's like a small town in Maine, like 94% white state. You get loads of Somalis pumped in, and what happens,
Apparently they murder someone.
Yeah. So for weeks beforehand, tensions were rising, and then all of a sudden it just explodes one day in the park. The local police chief calls in the CRS, and what do? So the website, the case study, which was up but is now down, said that the CRS was called in to help ease racial tensions and strengthen community relations. Now,
strengthen community relations.
Sure. Well,
that's a very great euphemistic.
Yeah,
word.
I mean, so this is the thing. I mean, all the language on the website is totally euphemistic, right? Of course, it's bureaucraties, right? but we get to see what the peacemaking process actually looked like. So the first thing they do is they get members of Donald Giusti's family, his uncle and his sister, to come out and say, please, we want peace, we want calm, we don't want retribution, retaliation, nothing like that. We want people to be able to use this park where Donald Giusti was killed peacefully and to be happy. So they both made public statements, a bit like Austin Metcalf's father. Right? And they were both reading from the same script. It's very obvious. They use the same words, the same emphases, etc. So that's one kind of plank of the CRS approach. The second thing that they did was they made sure that the man who was identified as the killer actually got off with a 9-month sentence. So he was
Why, though?
They ensured he didn't get what he deserved.
Didn't get murder. No, he pleaded no contest to a reduced charge of criminal negligence for stamping a man to death in a park. So
I'm assuming that the logic would be, well, if he was convicted of murder, then it would confirm that this was some kind of motivated assault, which could go back into riling up community tension.
Exactly. So I think that's the logic, is that, look, this man can't be convicted fully for what he's done, because that would make the Somalis angry, and then there'd be more incidents like this.
But it also make you angry at the Somalis.
Exactly.
That's the thing they're trying to avoid.
So we need to try and skirt both edges and keep it down the line.
But what it basically amounts to is saying that a brutal racial murder doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's swept under the carpet. And I hate to be the imagine if the boot was on the other foot guy, but can you imagine if a gang of angry Guidos, a gang of angry Italian Americans smashed a Somali over the head? And
could you imagine what might happen if a man overdosing on fentanyl happened to be being lent on by a police officer as he was dying and caught on camera doing so?
It's this moral debt that's not being paid that is the real crime.
But so this is like the best documented instance of what the CRS does. But actually, when you know that this is what the CRS does, then a lot of things start to make more sense. So
America has a taxpayer-funded government department enforcing liberal progressivism at any cost.
But really, I would say actually enforcing anti-white racism, and this is thing. And this is part and parcel actually with all the DEI programs, with affirmative action, with all of the indoctrination now, the anti-racism training that children have from kindergarten, so it's part of a broader kind of structure, I think, of anti-white racism in American government. But like I say, things start to make sense. So you see in a new light, for example, the appalling, repulsive statement that was made by the father of Aidan Clark during the election campaign. You remember this? I wish my son had been killed by an old white guy instead of a...
Well, he wasn't.
A Haitian.
But no, it's the thing. Because they say his death has been used to spread hate towards migrants. It's about, I want to avoid the negative characterization of a group that has, whether we like to admit it or not, taken on a kind of moral debt for their crime against another group. That's, again, the liberal mind has real trouble dealing with collective guilt, but I'm sorry, the human soul feels it, and that's what all of this is about.
But what's particularly interesting about Aidan Clark's father is that this was during the election campaign, right? This was when, after Captive Dreamer,
the Springfield, and with all of the Haitians,
the 50,000 or 20,000,
they were eating the dogs,
eating the cats, so this was a live political issue, and it was a winning issue for Trump in the end, I think, and so that makes the likelihood that actually the Community Relations Service stepped in more likely. I think
that's exactly what they did.
I think that's exactly what they did. They went and they spoke to the father, and they said, look, would you say something about the politicization of your child's murder? And whether they wrote him a script or whether they just sat down and talked to him and said, maybe it would be good if you said this, we don't know. And
it's always the same script, though. You're spreading hate towards this group. And it's like, okay, but that group just killed someone that you know and love.
Right, and again, it's...
I wonder what they hang over these people's heads to get them to comply with this.
I bet what they say is, well, look, you don't want race riots, do you? You don't want You don't want this community being targeted by the white community, do you?
I also think that there's just an element of basic psychology. Like if you think about the Milgram experiments, the Stanley Milgram experiments, the electroshock experiments, right? You put someone in a room and you tell them to administer electric shocks to somebody that could potentially kill them. They don't know whether it's real or not. And then you bring in someone with a lab coat, and they say, okay, keep cranking it. And because the person's in a lab coat and they look like they're an expert, the ordinary person tends to do it. I think there's an element actually where it's just these people turn up and people are like, okay, I've got to go along with this. You know, there's the glare of the national and even international media. And we've got these people, these nice people from the government who want me to do something
vulnerable.
Good. Yeah, and I think white people generally are more trusting of the government maybe than
they should be.
And certainly than other groups. But there's some good news, at least, which is that the CRS actually appears to be on its way out. So we've got big purges across the US government. This was announced very quietly, and it was announced quietly actually because people just don't know about the CRS.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is that people just don't know that this department even exists, but it does. So there's a memo circulating. It's been marked for closure, and you know, I think it's part and parcel disclosure of Trump's broader assault actually on the kind of edifice of anti-white racism within the US government, within the education system, etc. I think that's how it should be seen, and I'm sure that's how people in the Trump admin are probably conceiving of this. But it would be nice before the agency is disbanded, actually, if we had some kind of investigation of what it does, and if it's actually brought to light. You know, this is what this department, this agency has been doing, and this is how they've been doing it. It would be nice to know, you know, which cases were they involved in?
I'd love a full disclosure of all of the major incidents that they were involved in covering up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would discover that actually it's been working overtime all across the US. Yeah. Small cases that never make it into the media or barely make it into the media. You know, which judges have they been talking to? You know, how were they able to alter the sentencing of murderers and rapists and violent criminals? I mean, it's something that needs to have the lid blown off it, I think. But what's interesting, of course, is that this isn't confined to the US. So this kind of shaping of public opinion in the face of negative events, in the face of violent events that have the potential, I think, to cause kind of spectacular blowback and public outrage and maybe even riots, that kind of thing. We actually see that across the Western world, and in the UK it's called, or one of the things it's called, is controlled spontaneity. And there was a great piece that revealed what controlled spontaneity is in sort of 2017, 2018, 2019 actually, on the website Middle East Eye. So I actually wrote about controlled spontaneity, and here's what I wrote. So the sinister activities of organizations like the Community Relations Service fit into a wider pattern of manipulation of public opinion in the West, especially in response to the more violent negative effects of mass migration and demographic change. Back in 2009, the website Middle East Eye reported on a form of government planning dubbed controlled spontaneity in the UK, which had been devised specifically in preparation for terrorist attacks. The basic idea behind controlled spontaneity is for the government to shape and direct public opinion and emotion in ways that prevent disorder when an atrocity occurs. This includes everything from pre-selecting hashtags and images to circulate on social media, to encourage members of the victims' families to make public statements disavowing hatred and staging apparently unprompted gestures of love and support at the site of the incident, such as people handing out flowers or posters with saccharine messages on them.
Or breaking out into spontaneous performances of Oasis.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
It just happened to be a woman who was an actor.
Yeah.
The thing I hate about all of that, though, is that essentially what it's saying to the community that has committed the atrocity is you don't have to change. That's the real issue, because the social function of this is a kind of broad-scale negotiation that instructs the inferior community that has much smaller numbers and lives in the country at the pleasure of the majority community, how to live with them, right? And what the government is doing here is artificially inserting itself into this cultural negotiation and preventing the corrective that needs to occur. Now, I'm not saying it's just or good or liberal or anything like that, but I think it is very human, and I think that this is honestly a deeply artificial state of affairs.
Well, see, for me, it's far worse than that. It's showing that the government go into the mass migration with the knowledge and understanding that these people will, by their presence, end up committing atrocities. Our job as the government is not to prevent them committing atrocities, only to manage perception after it's happened.
But also, you can see how the doctrine of human rights has been morphed against from the people against the state to the minority against the majority. Right? The entire point of the doctrine of human rights now is to protect minority rights from the interests of the majority.
I will never forgive John Stuart Mill for coining the tyranny of the majority.
But what's interesting is the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny of the majority is justice.
Yeah.
The tyranny of the majority is seeking the truth about crime. Right? I mean, that's an interesting redefinition, isn't it? That's
also the demand that you live conformable to our rules and our society. That's, if you consider that tyranny, go home.
Well, quite. So, I mean, once you actually know what to look for, you see recognizable elements of controlled spontaneity everywhere, basically in every Western country. So, you'll see it with the attacks on Christmas markets in Berlin, in Germany. You'll see it with the Bataclan. There was similar stuff. There was stuff to do with Charlie Hebdo, to do with...
There was the Nottingham murders as well.
And with even the Christchurch mosque shootings, Brenton Tarrant in New Zealand. It's like it's a playbook. It's like it's a playbook that just keeps being deployed by Western governments. And I mean, I'm sure you know as well, what they've done since the pandemic is they've drawn on the evidence of the pandemic too, on the massive amounts of behavioral data that they have from the pandemic to understand how they can nudge people in particular directions, what they can expect people's responses to be to particular government initiatives. I mean, it's deeply sinister. It's deeply sinister, and more people need to know about it, of course. But here's my conclusion from the piece I wrote. Or it was for Human Events in 2023. Our governments, as a matter of course, manipulate us to prevent us from grasping the realities of the problems we face. They have their script, and they want us to keep reading from it. If we do that, our fate is assured.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.